There comes a time in every woman's life when she must stop looking for validation from the world and start seeing the value within herself. This speech is about that moment when a woman looks in the mirror and, for the first time, doesn't criticize what she sees, but finally smiles and says, "I am enough." She wasn't born confident. She was shaped by storms, hurt by opinions, and made to believe she wasn't enough unless she looked a certain way, achieved certain things, or pleased certain people. But one day, she grew tired. Tired of running after approval, tired of shrinking herself, tired of believing she was incomplete. That's when everything changed. The moment she stopped seeking to be more and started being herself, peace arrived quietly. Like the morning sun, this woman didn't suddenly become perfect. She simply stopped apologizing for being imperfect. She learned that her worth wasn't a discount tag waiting for someone else to define. She understood that life is not about becoming what others expect. It's about becoming who you truly are. And when she embraced that, everything that used to make her insecure became her strength. She realized that comparison is the thief of joy. For most of her life, she had looked around instead of within. She measured her beauty by someone else's reflection, her success by someone else's applause, and her worth by how many people approved of her choices. Every time she opened her phone and scrolled through those perfect pictures, she felt smaller, not because she wasn't doing enough, but because she was seeing life through the distorted lens of comparison. She didn't realize that what she was comparing herself to was often an illusion, a filter version of someone's highlight reel. Yet she let it dictate how she felt about herself. One morning, as she sat by her window with a cup of tea, something inside her shifted. She looked at her own life, the laughter, the tears, the small victories that no one saw, and she wondered why she never celebrated them. Why was she so quick to admire others, but so slow to appreciate her own journey? She began to see that comparison had stolen her contentment, her confidence, and her creativity. It had turned her blessings into burdens. She had spent so long wishing to walk in someone else's shoes that she forgot how beautifully her own fit. She started asking herself different questions. Instead of, "Why am I not like her?" she began to ask, "What can I learn from her?" That single shift changed everything. Comparison breeds insecurity, but inspiration breeds growth. She learned that she could admire someone's success without belittling her own path. Just because someone else is blooming doesn't mean your season is over. The garden of life is vast enough for every flower to thrive in its own time. Slowly, she began to practice gratitude. She started writing down 3 things she was proud of every night. Small things, like keeping her promises, showing kindness, or simply making it through a hard day. Over time, she realized that happiness doesn't grow where comparison lives. In thee, true peace comes when you stop counting what others have and start counting what you already hold. There were still moments when doubt crept in, moments when she would see someone ahead of her and feel that old sting of inadequacy. But now, she knew better. She reminded herself that everyone is running a different race, and no one crosses the finish line at the same time. Some paths are steep, some are winding, and some are still being built, and that's okay. She learned to trust her own pace, to believe that her timing is divine, not delayed. The more she focused on her journey, the more she grew. She discovered parts of herself she never knew existed. Her quiet resilience, her patient strength, her untold courage. When she stopped comparing, she started becoming. And that was the beginning of real joy. She realized that life is not about being better than others. It's about being better than you were yesterday. The day she understood that, she stopped competing and started creating. She no longer needed to prove her worth. She began to live it. She found beauty in her own reflection, grace in her own growth, and peace in her own story. That was the day comparison lost its power, because she finally saw that she was never meant to be anyone else. She was meant to be herself, and that was more than enough. She learned that there's no such thing as a perfect woman, only a real one. For years, she chased an illusion. She believed that if she looked flawless, spoke perfectly, behaved politely, and pleased everyone, she would finally be loved and respected. But no matter how hard she tried, there was always something missing. Someone who didn't approve, something that didn't align, some voice in her mind whispering, "You're still not enough." She was exhausted from pretending to be perfect, from hiding her flaws behind smiles and silence. She realized that perfection was not a goal, it was a prison. She started noticing how much energy she wasted trying to maintain an image that didn't truly represent her. Every day felt like a performance, where the applause was temporary, but the emptiness lasted. The truth was, she was afraid of being seen as she really was. Flawed, emotional, human. But the moment she accepted that perfection doesn't exist, she took her first breath of freedom. She discovered that people don't connect to perfection, they connect to honesty. It was in her vulnerability that she became powerful. It was in her realness that others found comfort. One day, she looked at herself in the mirror and saw beyond the imperfections, the tired eyes, the scars, the lines that life had drawn. She realized each mark told a story. The sleepless nights that shaped her wisdom, the mistakes that taught her strength, the heartbreaks that deepened her compassion. These were not flaws to hide, but evidence of her becoming. She didn't need to erase them, she needed to honor them. She started embracing her unpolished self, the version that laughed loudly, cried deeply, and sometimes didn't have it all figured out. And in that honesty, she felt lighter. She began to see that authenticity was more magnetic than any false image of perfection. Then, people started responding to her differently. They didn't admire her for being flawless. They respected her for being real. She stopped comparing her behind the scenes with someone else's highlights. She stopped waiting until everything was perfect to be happy. She started showing up as she was, imperfect but present. That shift changed the way she lived, loved, and led. Her confidence no longer depended on appearance or approval. It came from knowing that she was showing up truthfully. Perfection had once made her afraid of failure, but now she embraced mistakes as stepping stones. Every time she stumbled, she learned something new. Every flaw became a reminder that she was growing, evolving, and human, and that was beautiful. She began to understand that perfection is not about never falling. It's about rising with grace every time you do. The woman she became didn't have everything under control, but she had peace. She didn't need validation filters or applause to feel complete. Her worth wasn't measured by how perfectly she performed, but by how authentically she lived. She learned that perfection demands masks, but peace asks for truth. And she chose peace. In that choice, she found her true beauty, not in being the best version of someone else, but in being the truest version of herself. She no longer chased perfection because she realized she already possessed something far more powerful: authenticity. And when she lived from that place, she finally became whole. Instead of begging for attention or love, she decided to be her own peace. For so long, she thought peace would come from the presence of certain people, from the approval of voices she admired, or from relationships that made her feel seen. She kept searching for it in conversations, validation, and company. But every time she placed her peace in the hands of others, it slipped away. People came and went. Opinions shifted, and she was left chasing something that kept running from her. It took her years to understand that peace is not found. It's built within. There came a day when she simply grew tired of trying to please everyone, tired of being what others wanted her to be. That day, she sat quietly and asked herself, what if I stopped running? What if I made peace my home instead of my destination? It was in that stillness that she felt something powerful. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of calm. She realized that peace wasn't a gift people could give her. It was a choice she had to make for herself. She began to withdraw from the chaos that drained her. It wasn't that she stopped loving people. She simply stopped needing their approval to feel loved. She learned that some relationships feel heavy because we expect them to complete us. But true peace comes when you stop expecting others to fix the emptiness you refuse to fill. She started nurturing her own spirit, reading, praying, reflecting, walking in nature, and sitting in silence. Slowly, she began to recognize her own heartbeat again. There were moments when loneliness tried to disguise itself as peace, whispering that isolation was her only safety, but she learned to tell the difference. Peace didn't mean cutting off the world. It meant connecting with it without losing herself. It meant learning to speak less when arguments only led to noise, to step back when situations demanded her reaction and to protect her energy like a sacred space. She noticed that the more she prioritized her peace, the more selective she became with her time and emotions. She stopped explaining herself to those who refused to understand her. She no longer fought to be heard in rooms that only echoed judgment. Instead, she found beauty in silence, in choosing to walk away instead of breaking herself to stay. That was her power. With peace came clarity. She started seeing that not every battle was meant to be fought, and not every person was meant to stay. Some people were lessons in disguise, teaching her that love should never cost her sanity. She stopped confusing attachment with affection. The relationships that once left her anxious now made her grateful, not because they lasted, but because they taught her how to value her peace over her pride. Each morning, she began her day not by checking her phone, but by checking in with her heart. Was she calm? Was she aligned? That practice changed her life. She found that when she centered herself, no chaos outside could shake her. She became grounded, calm, and quietly powerful, not because life stopped being messy, but because she no longer let the mess control her spirit. She became the kind of woman whose peace was her presence. Her calm became her confidence, her stillness her strength. People noticed the glow she carried, thinking it came from happiness, but it came from something deeper, a decision. The decision to no longer seek peace in people or possessions, but to find it in herself, again and again, until it became her way of life. Every heartbreak, every failure, every rejection became a testimony of her courage. For a long time, she tried to hide the parts of her story that hurt the most. She would smile in public and cry in private, thinking that strength meant silence and healing meant pretending nothing ever happened. But one day, she realized that her scars were not signs of weakness. They were evidence of survival. Every wound she carried was a reminder that she faced something meant to break her and still found a way to rise. She began to see her scars differently. They weren't ugly marks to be concealed. They were symbols of battles fought and victories won. Behind every scar was a story, a lesson about resilience, faith, and the quiet strength that only pain can teach. When she looked back at the moments she thought she wouldn't survive, she saw how those same moments had shaped her into who she had become. The woman who once questioned her worth had become a living example of endurance. She realized that pain was not her enemy, it was her teacher. Every time life pushed her down, she learned something new about herself. When people betrayed her, she learned to trust herself more. When she faced loss, she discovered gratitude for what truly mattered. When her plans fell apart, she learned that sometimes divine redirection feels like rejection at first. She started to see her life not as a series of failures, but as a journey of becoming, a process where every scar added depth to her spirit. There were days when she still felt the sting of her past, the heartbreaks that lingered, the words that wounded her confidence. But now she didn't run from those memories. She faced them with grace. She would close her eyes, breathe deeply, and remind herself, I survived that. I'm still here. That realization gave her strength no comfort ever could. Survival became her pride, and healing became her mission. She also learned to stop hiding her story. She began sharing her pain, not for sympathy, but to show others that healing is possible. When she spoke her truth, she saw tears in the eyes of those who needed to hear it. Her scars became a bridge connecting her to others who were still bleeding. She understood that the world doesn't need perfect people. It needs honest ones who can say, I've been there too, in time, She stopped wishing for a life without pain and started thanking life for the lessons pain taught her. She realized that every storm had built something inside her: patience, empathy, wisdom. Without those hard seasons, she would never have discovered how strong her spirit truly was. Her scars no longer made her feel broken, they made her feel brave. I flew for 20. The beauty of her journey was that her scars didn't just remind her of what she went through. They reminded her of who she became because of it. She was no longer the same woman who once cried for closure or begged for answers. She had transformed. Her scars told a story of growth, of battles that tested her faith, and of victories that no one else saw. Now, when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see someone damaged. She saw a warrior. Her scars no longer whispered pain. They spoke power. They reminded her that life may leave marks. But it's those very marks that make us real, that make us human, and that make our stories worth telling. Growth became more important than applause. There was a time when she lived for approval, when the sound of clapping hands and the words of validation were the only proof she believed she was doing something right. She used to measure her progress through the eyes of others, thinking success only mattered if it was seen, shared, or celebrated. But one day, she realized something profound. Not every stage of growth comes with applause. Some of the most important victories happen in silence, when no one is watching and no one is cheering. She started remembering the moments that truly changed her, not the glamorous ones, but the quiet ones. The nights when she cried herself to sleep, but still woke up determined. The days when she failed publicly, but kept showing up privately. The seasons when she felt invisible, yet continued to pour her heart into her purpose. Those were the times that shaped her character more than any praise ever could. Growth, she learned, doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it's just you and your faith doing the inner work that no one else can see. When she stopped seeking validation, she found freedom. She no longer needed to prove her worth to anyone. She realized that real progress often looks like small steps, consistent effort, and quiet discipline. There were moments when people didn't notice her hard work, when her success wasn't celebrated, and when her effort seemed unseen. But she didn't let that stop her. She understood that seeds don't grow in the spotlight. they grow in the soil. Her roots were deepening even when the world couldn't see her bloom. It wasn't easy. There were days when the lack of recognition made her question her path. She would wonder, am I even making a difference? But then she remembered why she started, not for fame, not for validation, but for purpose. That reminder grounded her. She began to focus more on her growth than her visibility. The applause that once fueled her began to fade in importance, replaced by a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing she was becoming stronger, wiser, and more aligned with her calling. She started celebrating progress differently. Instead of waiting for others to notice her achievements, she started appreciating her own evolution, the peace she gained after letting go of what no longer served her, the patience she learned in waiting seasons, and the confidence she built after every failure. She realized that growth doesn't need to be loud to be real. It doesn't need to be seen to be significant. As she continued this journey, she noticed a powerful shift. The same people who once overlooked her began to wonder how she had changed so much. But the truth was simple. She had outgrown the need for their applause. She wasn't performing anymore. She was evolving. Every quiet step forward became her private victory. Every lesson learned in solitude became her strength in public. She found place in the process, not in reaching the top, but in becoming the kind of woman who no longer needed the crowd to believe in her worth. She realized that applause fades, but growth stays. The cheers of the world are temporary, but the transformation within lasts forever. So she kept walking, not for recognition, but for revelation. Because growth, even when unseen, is the loudest proof that she is still moving, still becoming, and still rising higher than she ever thought she could. She learned to say no without guilt. For most of her life, she believed that being kind meant saying yes. Yes to favors that drained her. Yes to people who took her for granted. Yes to responsibilities that weren't hers to carry. She thought that by always being available, she was being good-hearted, but deep inside, she was slowly disappearing. Her smile stayed, but her peace faded. Every yes that she didn't mean was a quiet betrayal of herself. It took her years to understand that saying no wasn't rejection, it was self-respect. At first, the word felt heavy on her tongue. She worried people would call her selfish or distant. She feared losing relationships or being misunderstood. But the truth was, the people who genuinely loved her didn't need her constant availability. They needed her authenticity. She began to realize that boundaries weren't walls to keep people out. They were gates to protect what mattered most. And what mattered most was her peace, her energy, and her emotional health. The first time she said no, it was small, refusing to attend an event she didn't want to go to. The world didn't fall apart. No one hated her. The second time, she said no to taking on someone else's emotional baggage that wasn't hers to carry. Again, she felt lighter. Every time she chose to honor her limits, she found a new kind of freedom. It was uncomfortable at first, but deeply empowering. She realized that people who truly care about you will never punish you for protecting yourself. As she started practicing boundaries, she noticed a change in her relationships. Some people drifted away, those who were only there to take from her. At first, it hurt. But then she saw the truth. They weren't leaving because she changed in thee. They were leaving because she stopped serving their comfort at the expense of her peace. She began to attract new people, those who valued her not for what she could give, but for who she was. Boundaries taught her clarity. She learned that she didn't have to explain every no, didn't have to justify her peace. She realized that she had spent too long over explaining herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. Now, she simply walked away from chaos without anger or resentment. Silence became her response, and distance became her protection. She understood that preserving her energy wasn't arrogance, it was wisdom. With time, she saw how boundaries changed not only her relationships but her mindset. She became more focused, less anxious, and more centered. The energy she once wasted trying to please everyone, she now poured into her purpose. She found more joy in quiet moments, more creativity in solitude, and more strength in stillness. She no longer felt the need to be everywhere or please everyone. She just needed to be true to herself. She discovered that peace was not something she had to chase. It was something she had to protect. And protection required saying no, even when it was uncomfortable. Every boundary she set became a declaration that her well-being mattered. Every no she spoke became a step toward healing. She stopped apologizing for needing space, rest, or solitude. She began to honor her emotions and respect her capacity. She understood that love isn't proven by exhaustion. The right people will understand your no as easily as they celebrate your yes. And so she learned to guard her peace fiercely, knowing that the world doesn't reward those who burn out, but those who burn brightly, because they've learned when to stop, rest, and protect their flame. She no longer feared being alone, she found power in it. There was a time when silence terrified her, when the house was quiet and her phone stopped buzzing. She felt uneasy, as if loneliness were a shadow following her. She filled her days with people, conversations, and distractions, believing that being surrounded meant being valued. But the more she sought company, the more she realized that emptiness can exist even in a crowded room. She was present everywhere, but connected nowhere. One day, after another draining conversation that left her feeling unseen, she decided to sit with herself. No noise, no phone, no audience, just her thoughts and her breath. At first, it felt uncomfortable, but slowly, something within her began to shift. In that stillness, she started to hear the voice she had ignored for years. Her own. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was gentle, honest, and full of wisdom. She realized that her fear of solitude came from a deeper fear, the fear of facing herself. But when she finally did, she discovered that she wasn't as lost as she thought. She found clarity where confusion used to live. She began to see that solitude was not loneliness. It was sacred space, a place where she could reconnect with her soul. As days passed, she started craving that quiet more often. She would wake up early, sit by her window, and just breathe. The world outside was rushing, but she was learning the art of stillness. She understood that solitude wasn't about isolation but alignment. It gave her time to reflect, to heal, and to listen to what life had been trying to tell her all along. In that silence, she met her true self, the one who didn't need validation, the one who wasn't defined by roles or relationships, the one who was enough just as she was. The more time she spent alone, the stronger she became. She began to enjoy her own company, taking herself out for walks, writing her thoughts, dancing to her favorite songs without waiting for anyone to join. What once felt empty now felt empowering. She realized that she was never truly alone because she had herself. And that was a relationship worth nurturing. There were moments when people questioned her newfound quietness, thinking something was wrong. But she smiled because she knew something was finally right. She was no longer desperate for attention or approval. She didn't need to fill every silence with noise or every absence with someone. She was learning that solitude is where souls recharge and hearts regain strength. Her solitude became her sanctuary, a space where she could release the weight of expectations and simply be. It was there she discovered the difference between being alone and being lonely. Loneliness is when you crave others to fill a void. Solitude is when you fill that void with your own presence. She realized that peace doesn't always come from being around people. Sometimes it's found when you walk away from everything that distracts you from yourself. Through solitude, she became more grounded. She learned to make decisions from intuition instead of impulse. She no longer feared silence because she understood that silence speaks truth, the kind that noise tries to drown. In that quiet space, she became her own anchor, her own friend, her own guide. What once felt like emptiness became her greatest strength, the power to stand alone and still stand strong. She stopped asking, "Why me?" and started saying, "Thank you for teaching me." For years, every hardship felt like punishment. Every disappointment made her question her worth. And every closed door made her wonder if life was against her. She carried pain like a heavy backpack, dragging it through every season, replaying every mistake and heartbreak in her mind. She thought her struggles were signs of failure, that her pain meant she was doing something wrong. But one day, something changed. She looked back on all the times she thought she was breaking and realized she had actually been building. What she thought were endings were really beginnings in disguise. It wasn't an overnight transformation, it took time. Pain has a way of teaching lessons that comfort never can. She began to see how every storm had shaped her, how every unanswered prayer had protected her from something she didn't yet understand. Gratitude didn't erase the pain, but it softened it. It transformed her from a victim of her circumstances into a student of them. She started to see purpose where she once saw only problems. The betrayals taught her who to trust. The failures taught her humility. The delays taught her patience. And the heartbreaks taught her how to love without losing herself. At first, gratitude felt forced. How could she possibly be thankful for the things that hurt her? But as time passed, she realized that gratitude doesn't mean loving the pain. It means loving who you become because of it. When she started to look at her scars through that lens, her entire perspective shifted. The same moments that once made her cry now made her proud. She began to see beauty in her journey, even the broken parts, because those were the moments that built her strength. She learned to thank the people who left because they made room for those who would stay. She thanked the failures because they redirected her toward her purpose. She thanked the closed doors because they taught her that not everything denied is a loss. Some things are protection in disguise. Gratitude turned her confusion into clarity. It taught her that life isn't something happening to her, it's something happening for her. Slowly, she noticed her energy changing. She no longer woke up heavy with resentment or regret. Instead, she carried quiet peace, the kind that comes from trusting that everything she experienced was preparing her for something greater. The pain didn't define her anymore. It refined her. Every time she looked back, she saw growth where she used to see grief. She began to live differently. Instead of complaining about what she lacked, she appreciated what she had. Instead of resenting her challenges, she used them as fuel. Gratitude became her daily habit, not just for the good days, but for the difficult ones too. When life threw her storms, she whispered thanks because she knew storms don't destroy strong roots. They reveal them. Gratitude taught her resilience. It helped her see that peace doesn't come from having a perfect life, but from finding purpose in an imperfect one. She stopped chasing happiness as a destination and started creating it in the moment. Even in her quiet tears, she could now say, "Thank you, because I'm learning, I'm growing, and I'm becoming." Her pain had turned into wisdom, her wounds into wings. Gratitude didn't just change her story, it changed the way she told it. No longer as a story of suffering, but as a story of strength.